This is 6.5 amphibians and reptiles. We have one more section in this unit talking about birds and mammals. Before we do that, we need to talk about amphibians. Amphibians, what are they? They're vertebrates that live in water as larvae and land as adults. Now, let's talk about this. So you see in this picture, this is a salamander, and you can see that it even still has gills. And so some amphibians are more tied to water than others. Whereas you take like a toad, it's going to spend most of its time on land, but it still has to lay its eggs in the water. And so depending on the type of amphibian, it's going to be more or less tied to water, but all amphibians by definition have some direct tie to water and can't live completely away from it. Speaking of that, where did amphibians come from? Well, it's believed that there's some fish that existed that were able to pick their heads up out of the mud and breathe the air, which is pretty necessary if you're going to live on land, right? And they were good at that. They adapted to life on land, and eventually species are going to come from that group. This is a picture of the famous Tiktaalik. Everyone loves talking about Tiktaalik. So specifically adaptations for land, what are they? Have to be able to breathe the air, right, from something other than gills, because gills need water. So amphibians do this with lungs, and they breathe through their skin as well, or do gas exchange through their skin. It's a better way of saying that. And they have limb girdles. Limb girdles are something that support your appendages. So like we have limb girdles, like our shoulders and our hips. Amphibians, very similar to that. Shoulder bones, hip bones that attach the appendages to the main section of the body allow for weight support, allow you to pick your head up out of the mud if you're an amphibian, just right out of the mud if you're that frog, whatever. Essential functions, let's talk about feeding. So for amphibians, they are going to be herbivores as larvae, so they eat just like algae and stuff that's in the pond. And as adults, they're going to be carnivores. And so you see this shift as they metamorphosize, right? We talked about metamorphosis with insects, very similar with amphibians in that there's a complete change from the, or not necessarily complete, sometimes it's an incomplete kind of thing. You see that with salamanders, particularly like going back here to this salamander, it's more of an incomplete. And so you're not going to have to be able to distinguish between those. I just think it's cool. Moving on, talking about respiration, circulation. We mentioned respiration already. They do gas exchange through their skin, through lungs, and some retain their gills, depending on the species. Circulation, big thing here, is they have a double loop circulation. So notice, remember with fish, they had a single loop. Here you see two loops, looks like a figure 8. And so you have a loop that goes to the lungs and a loop that goes to the rest of the body. And this provides some separation between the blood that doesn't have oxygen and the blood that does. It's a good thing. Moving on. Movement. Some amphibians can jump, like that frog. Look at it jumping. Amphibians are able to run. Some of them kind of runish. They like scurry-ish. You know, they're not very fast. And so they're still able to swim. And so amphibians' movement is an adaptation to their being able to be on land and also be in the water. For response, same kind of thing. They have the ability to use their senses in the water, and so like frogs and salamanders have like a protective eyelid that's transparent. It's kind of like having your built-in goggles. But they also have some things that allow them to hear on land, like the tympanic membrane, which is a fancy word for an eardrum. You can see it there. It allows them to hear, right? Some amphibians actually still have a lateral line, like fish, which you'd expect to see. And so, yeah, some examples of amphibians. You got the salamanders there in the upper left. I think that's a tiger salamander, which is, you know, a good thing. And then bottom left, you got frogs, and there's toads also. A big difference between frogs and toads is just warts, I guess. And then on the upper right, you have a muddy sock puppet, or it's a caecilian is what it's called, which is a legless amphibian. It's not a snake. It is an amphibian because it's not a snake. Snakes have other qualities. Speaking of snake qualities, reptiles. What is a reptile? Reptile is vertebrates with dry and scaly skin. Scales are important there. They have an amniotic egg, which is an egg that's able to be laid outside of the water, and they're able to live their entire lives apart from water. Let's talk about them. So a little bit about reptile evolution. Typically people think dinosaurs, right, when they think of reptiles, but if you notice from this graph, dinosaurs had this whole other track apart from modern reptiles. You think modern reptiles are like snakes and lizards are the most modern reptiles. Turtles are way back there. Actually, they're the oldest of the extant reptiles, if you don't want to count birds, because birds are kind of reptile-ish, but they're just birds. So you can see here, the big idea is that the reptiles had a common ancestry, and then you can see they kind of split off. Crocodiles have remained unchanged for quite a long time as well. And then the first mammals came from reptile ancestry as well. And then they all died because there was a thing. This is actually just talking about the idea that, when we think of evolution of reptiles, we think of dinosaurs, and all dinosaurs went extinct at a particular time. You can see there the line just kind of stopped short. But reptiles remained just in a different form. Reptiles are ectotherms. This means that they have to control their body temperature using their behavior. Sometimes you'll hear this called cold-blooded, which is not really a good way of saying it. It just means that they have to directly control their body temperature by getting in warm areas or on cold areas, depending on what they need to do to their body temperature. This snake is sunning because it was cold. If it was warm, it would go and hide in the shade. You get the idea. Control their body temperature through their behavior. Excretion. So reptiles, they are living away from water, so they need to conserve water. And so their kidneys are going to be different than like a mammal kidney in that they're going to make a very concentrated urine. It's almost solid in some reptiles and birds, which is not surprising. We know all about birds having solid urine, or it's more like pasty urine. We're going to talk about that when we talk about birds. And for response, very specific and highly developed sensory organs allow them to capture prey. You can see the lizard there flicking its tongue, allows it to quote unquote smell the air. And some reptiles are able to detect heat, which is what that little mouse there has a heat signature. And so the snake can see it and then have some breakfast or whatever meal it chooses, I guess. For movement, you can tell the difference between a reptile and an amphibian because reptiles are going to have their legs underneath them, like you see this lizard, versus just out to the side, kind of like this. This is more amphibian, this is more reptile, and this is going to allow the reptiles to run really quickly, or in the case of snakes, watch other things run. Reproduction. Amniotic egg is the big thing. Amniotic egg is an egg that can be laid on land and not need the water. It's got its own self-contained water system, I guess. And so reptiles have to lay their eggs on land. In fact, like crocodiles, they live in the water their whole lives, but they come out of the water to lay their eggs, which is kind of backwards from amphibians. Amniotic egg, pretty important. What are some examples of reptiles? Well, you got the lizards and snakes group. You've got the crocodile group, which have been around a long time. Crocodiles, interestingly enough, show some parental care in their after their eggs hatch, which is kind of new. Turtles are the oldest group of reptiles, and they're distinct. They have a shell. Turtles and tortoises, the difference is just land, water, but basically the same thing. And then that big green lizard thing is called a tuatara, and it's just one of the older groups. It's a very primitive lizard, very rare, actually only found in one spot in the world, but it is its own group of reptiles. Hopefully this was helpful. Birds and mammals are next.